Well, I finally have the sheathing done and all primed. That was a job. And all the strips are off the house and most of the fixtures are off. And early next week, they're going to be here ready to put siding on.
Somebody actually told me that it's got to look uglier before it gets better.
So one last thing to do, and no minor thing, I've got to put a ledger board up here for the little porch deck we're going to have in front of the house. The ledger board has to be in before they side. So I'm going to start marking that up and get that at least fastened to the wall so they can put some siding around it and we can finish the deck later.
Wonderful.
So I guess all I can say is let's get started. Well, I'm sure like me, you know there are a lot of videos out there about how to build a deck and how to install a ledger board correctly. Well, I'm going to do a video on this one today because this house is a unique situation, one of those you encounter with a prefab home. Instead of a 2x board used for the rim joist, what we have here is simply a rim joist on the end of the inside floor joist. That's a piece of 5/8 sheathing material like we have on the house. And I can't anchor a ledger board to that. I have to anchor this ledger board to the floor joists on the inside going through the sheathing. So I need to make sure those are all marked properly. And I had to find where the farthest joist was to anchor the far end of the ledger board that I want to put up. I'm doing an 18-foot long porch deck on the front of the house, and so I need to know where to start and then determine where to end so that I can put up my flashing material and get the board lined up and installed and know where I'm going to hit those joists. So I've made a mark here. I've put a screw in to anchor my tape on the end. This will be the far end of the ledger board. Go 1.5 inches this way will be the first joist attached to the end of the ledger board. Now we're going to mark where the ledger board ends on the other end and where that floor joist will attach. For the tape anchor where the ledger board starts on the other end, I've pulled it across, and what I need is 17 feet and 9 inches. That'll be the other end of the ledger board. 17 feet 9 inches allows the 3 inches I need for another 1.5 inches on this end for the end joist here, and 1.5 inches on the other end for that end joist. Starting on this end, using the bottom of the door as a starting point, staying 1.5 inches below the bottom of the door to allow room for the plank boards, deck boards, I established a reference line, made a mark on a piece of 2x4, and then went down to the other end and simply using a level I've got that's got a little laser in the end, I line that up with that mark on the other end to get a mark over here, a reference point, and then I use that to adjust and come up with a line that is about 12 inches above the bottom of the sheathing, and that's the width of the deck flashing that I'm going to be putting on here, the self-adhesive deck flashing. Now that'll be a little bit above the ledger board. The ledger board is 7.5 inches wide. I've got 7 inches of space, so it's going to lap down past the sheathing about 1/2 inch, which is fine. But now I have a straight line that's consistent all the way across, even though the sheathing is not consistent at the bottom. That's why I couldn't do 12 inches straight up from the bottom all the way across. And as you recall, when I put the sheathing on in that video, some of them I had to make a little shorter to clear the bulge in the concrete. So now we're ready to put the self-adhesive deck flashing on. As you recall, I need to know exactly where these floor joists butt up against the rim joists of the house so that I can fasten the ledger board on securely into those, since I don't have enough material to use unless I get it into that joist. Now I have to make a confession. I got into a rush when I replaced the sheathing, and I didn't mark the locations of those joist ends when I had the chance. So I have to, I know roughly where they are, where they're offset, but I needed to find out exactly because I have to get those ledger board bolts in there securely. So what I did, here's a little tip, is I took the drill and I knew roughly where that was. And I did a couple of pilot holes and I drilled along there. I could tell, sound where I was, and I had a photograph that would tell me. Now with those holes drilled to a certain depth, I take a nail that's longer than that drill bit, and if I put a nail in here roughly where I think the stud is, nail only goes in so far, about a ½ inch still sticks out. Check over here. Oh, I'm still on a end of a joist. Over here, I was still on the end of a joist. Right here, I go right straight through. That means right here, I am now only into the rim joist. So I know there is the center of that floor joist. I carried that line up to here with the level and marked it. These have even spacing, so now I can just take my tape measure and I can go 16 inches to find each one and get it marked, and we should be in good shape. I found the rest of the floor joists, and then I went along, and above where I'm going to put that adhesive back flashing, I drew a line above each one as a reference point later when I get the ledger board in position and I want to mount it to these joists. So the other thing I needed to do is determine where the joists for the deck were going to fall, because you can't have them fall right on top of the ledger attachment bolts. And those are marked with an X here, just roughly. They'll get marked in detail on the ledger before I put it up. But at least I know now that I'm going to clear the attachment points for that ledger board where it goes onto the house. With that done, I can go ahead now and put that adhesive back flashing material on. All right, we'll put the flashing on. Takes a couple people to do this. Start pulling the backing off. Now they say that this is repositionable. We'll find out. I've got a chalk line here for the top, and I have edge mark for the start.
That's it.
That's it right there. And I'm going to get that top line fastened down and try to get this edge pulled so we don't get any bubbles in it, if we can avoid it. Whoop. All right, and we'll just work our way along here carefully. Maybe. No, now we just put a bubble in it. All the way through on this. There we go. Okay.
There.
All right, we made it to the end. I made it about 4 inches past the ledger board for the overlap when they do the siding. Just make a quick, swift cut there and peel that away. Then we have the wall flashed. Now I need to put the ledger board up and get the metal flashing over the top of that, and we will be ready for siding. I made a fixture out of some old scrap lumber to place one end of the ledger board on to hold it in place at the right height while I adjusted the level of the ledger board across the span, referencing the chalk line that I'd put down for level. And then on this end, to make sure I had everything in line, I have a little platform here. I put a scrap of 2x4 and some shims, and I adjusted that until I had the board level. With that done, now I can put some temporary screws in to hold that in place, and then I can go down and do a similar thing on the other end and get the second board in. I left a consistent 1 3/8 space between the bottom of the door sill and the top of the ledger board. That'll allow room for the deck boards to go in and still leave a little space underneath that door sill. It was a busy day today with a couple of interruptions, but I finally got back at this. Here it's getting kind of late in the day. First board is attached with some temporary screws. This one is ready to attach now too. What I did then where it joins up is I made sure it was even on the top, because whenever you buy treated lumber, it's never the same width, so you gotta check that first. It is now set and level using my jig over here and putting shims in until it got level. Now I can fasten it, and tomorrow we can put the flashing on the top. The moment we've been waiting for, another step in the process. An empty dumpster ready to load up all the crap we've pulled off from the house, getting ready for the siding. Final preparations for putting the siding on are now complete. I have the flashing mounted over the top of the full length of the ledger board, and on each end I have installed these blocks, just a short piece of 2x8 to show where the side boards will be, where the joist boards, outside joist boards will be when I get ready to build the deck. So now they can install their siding around that. The only thing I have left, I have marked here where all of the ledger attachment bolts have to go, and I'll get that done before I build the deck. Probably in the next couple days I'll get that done, but that doesn't need to be in before they do the siding. I've got everything in place for them to do that, starting in a couple of days. I need to get these lag bolts in before this thing dries out anymore. It was pretty wet when I brought it home, and it starts to cup. It's starting to cup a little bit, but I can still draw it in with the lag bolts. So I've gone ahead and gotten all of them in except the last two, and we'll take a look at that. All right, I'm using special bolts designed for installing ledger boards. I have them long enough so I can get solidly into the floor joists in the house, because the sheathing that's used for the rim joist is not thick enough to hold these. So I've got an impact, get it started. Don't have to drill any pilot holes for these. You can see that start to pull in where it started to cup already. Get one more in down here. And there we have it. Just so that flange is pulling that board in. You don't want to pull it in too far because they want this bolt head exposed. So there you have it. I'll pull out these last couple construction screws that were put in to hold it temporarily, and we'll be all set to start building our deck.